Welcome to Short and to the Point, a podcast from the Comeback in Awful Announcing. Here's your host, Jessica Kleinschmidt.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Short and to the Point on Awful Announcing and the Comeback. Jessica Kleinschmidt here once again. Producer Philip behind the scenes. And speaking of producer Philip, I gave him a soccer podcast last week. This time, it's all about my stuff, the baseball, baby. I'm really excited about this. The regular season is winding down, which means we're heading toward the playoffs. And if you're a baseball hardo like myself, one of the top playoff moments in the history of Major League Baseball is that bat flip from José Bautista during the 2015 ALDS. Just like inject that into my veins. It's just a moment that I think about constantly. So we had the perfect guest to not only go over that, but his managerial career. Two-time Blue Jays manager John Gibbons joins the show today. We, of course, do talk about Bautista, but he's also very much a manager that I wish could have been my manager at one point as a reporter, as a broadcaster, just because of the way that he has the back of his players. And he was part of a really tough 2015 and 2016 season with the names of Bautista and Josh Donaldson, Justin Smoke, the big names that not only were big on the field, but certainly were big on the media side as well. He also is the author of a newly released book, Gibby, Tales of a Baseball Lifer. So I hope you guys enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Here's former Major League manager, John Gibbons. Well, Gibby joins me today. Welcome to Short and to the Point, my friend. I'm really excited to have you here.
Jessica, thanks for having me. When we touched base last week, I thought looking forward to this.
Yeah, definitely. And, obviously I want to talk about your show, the Gibby Show, which has been really fun to follow. But one thing that you said on the show, and I think you had actually José Bautista on the show, and we'll talk about him later. You kind of said, Jose, who would have thought I was in the podcast world? So after your managerial career, was it a straight shot into podcasting or media? Why podcasting?
Yeah. Hey, great question, Jessica. I still haven't figured that out. After my last year in Toronto, 18, I had another year on my contract. So I just stayed home with the family and all that kind of things. And then I got hired by the Atlanta Braves. My old guy, Alex Anthopoulos, gave me my second break there in Toronto, was, working with Atlanta now. He brought me over there as a special assignment guy. And then COVID hit, right? And then it shut down everything. So I was basically doing nothing like anybody else. And then the following year, just kind of it was a slow job. There wasn't a whole lot going on. But my last day in Toronto in 18, like 3 or 4 writers said, if you ever write a book, I want to write it for you, right? Book, never come on. Anyway, so I said, okay, right, whatever. So that kind of died off. But then later on, an old buddy of mine who had written one kind of brought that back, said, COVID's going on. Why don't we try this? Okay, so that led to being on social media. They said, you got to be on social media. I said, really? I'm late 50s. Really, this is what I want to be doing, And then, so they said, well, why don't you do a podcast now? Because everybody's doing a podcast. And it was, like I said, everything was just kind of slow when I was, what I was doing with the Braves. So we started up this show, and, then I resigned from the Braves because, conflict of interest, whatever. So that's how I got into it. It wasn't by design. It wasn't like, I want to try this, but I've actually really enjoyed it and got a couple guys that I do it with that they've, been really good with me. I'm not the running joke I've always had my whole life, and especially when I got into coaching and managing, is most people can't understand me. I talk fast or it's not clear, whatever it is. But it's kind of by design not by design, but you always keep people guessing. You probably say, "Hey, you talk fast. I don't know what you're saying." So to think that I'm doing something in the media and talking all the time is probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But here I am.
I will say, to your point and to defend you, if I'm talking to somebody, whether it's a player or manager, I can't understand them, I do a good follow-up question. It makes them happy. It makes me happy. You want to confirm that that's what they said. I have to go on the radio or TV and talk about what you talked about. And if I don't know what you said, then the segment's done. I don't know what Gibby said, so we have nothing. But it does help us out. So don't worry. It's great. I think it's great. And then if you at least embrace it, knowing that, I did talk fast, like it's fine. But no, it's been really cool.
Real quick. Hey, Jessica, you remember Bobby Cox, right? First time I met him, he was still managing the Braves, and we were in spring training. We started talking. And somehow the media got brought up, and he said, he says, you know what I always do? He says, I talk a lot and say nothing. I said, oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's kind of what I do.
I love that. Talks a lot and says nothing. I'm the queen of that. I can have a good 25-minute conversation, and you probably took nothing away from it because there was nothing there.
I know better than that.
But I think it's really cool though, because I think a really good podcast is obviously you have the relationships with people that you bring on there, but you're not too reportery, you're not too journalistic. And I think that like you can easily do that. It's not like you haven't been surrounded by media your entire career. It's a conversation. And I think that that's why the guys or whoever you have on the podcast trust you, is you're just literally gabbing with Gibby. And I feel like that brings out the like better in some of the guys. Obviously it's different if they've retired because they can be a little bit more open, but I think that's what makes it so great. I feel like I can put it on YouTube and just like walk away, and I feel like I'm like having a beer with you guys and we're just talking about ball. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. We're good. I'm glad to hear that. But, we basically focus on the Blue Jays. We talk about, baseball in the league, but mainly that's our focus, right? And, when we bring these guys on, I've been there. I know a lot of them, and I know how reluctant these guys are to do media all the time, right? And so it's basically what it is. It's a feel good, positive thing. We just kind of highlight their current career or their past career, whatever's, and laugh, or whatever. It's not any, what's wrong with the team? You stink. This kind of that, because otherwise you're not going to get anybody on, right?
Yeah.
For our particular show anyway, and it's a good time. And then of course, when I went up to Bautista's retirement or his ceremony. You see all the guys that have been on your show, and it's kind of like, a lot of them I didn't even really know at one time. And it's kind of like the way the baseball world is, it's kind of like it's a fraternity, and everybody's in it together, and you meet everybody changes teams sooner or later, but it's just a close knit bunch, you're part of that. And it's like, it's a lot of fun.
Well, and tell me about that. Cause when you transition from being in it and as evolved as you've been since then, what was the transition from being in front of the media to doing nothing to now being somewhat a part of the media? Because that must have been interesting.
Well, I found out one thing is I'm pretty good at doing nothing. I'll tell you that. That's
okay. That's good. Great.
As far as managing, and Toronto's got a big media. It's really obviously a big hockey country, right?
Yeah.
But there's good baseball media and everything, and there's a lot of them. And that's kind of I became friends with all these guys, right? And so what we do, you know how the scrum goes before bad practice, you guys get together and talk to the manager and all that.
Yeah.
They would come to my office, and there was a good 10 to 15 of them every day, right? But we might talk 5-10 minutes about baseball. Then we start talking about the world, right? Because you got Canada and the U.S., and they know more about what's going on in the U.S. than I do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it is. And I became friends, and I still keep in touch with a lot of these folks. But I've never really enjoyed getting in front of the camera. And let's say on a daily basis. To me, it was a pain in the butt. Some guys like it. Some guys are really good at it. To me, it was just kind of you have to do it. You better be adequate, right?
Yeah.
But it led to a lot of really good friendships. And then that's kind of what I said when we talked about earlier, when, the thing that I would be doing a podcast where you got to talk is kind of, most people would never expect me to do that,
Yeah. Well, and you kind of mentioned it, something that kind of blows my mind. Obviously I've covered Major League Baseball for a while, but I do it in the US, and I can't sometimes compute the fact that the Blue Jays are representing an entire country. Yes. And I think we don't realize that, because we're representing our cities, our towns, which is still on a good level, a good magnitude. But when you first got there and you're realizing this is about an entire country, what's that mentality like?
Well, you know what, I served 2 tours there, I guess you could say, and people would always say, because when I first got there, 92, 93, they won the back-to-back World Series, right? And then it was just lean years. And people would always say, though, hey, if you guys are relevant, the end of August, September, watch what happens, right? But we never were. It was always the Yankees, Red Sox in our division. The teams they had then would pull away, and by June, right, everybody else was kind of left behind. So it was all, you never experienced it. And then finally, when it came back in the second go around in 15, one of your boys, Josh Donaldson's out there, one of the Oakland A's, kind of led us to the promised land somewhat. But it finally happened, right? And then it was like a light switch, and everything everybody had always said came true. Not only in Toronto there, but all across the country. And then it just kind of kept snowballing. And then the next year was another good year. And so the biggest example of it, we'd go play in Seattle, right? You get, the Canadians would come down, from the Vancouvers, Edmontons, all those areas, Calgary's, and they would take over that whole city. And basically the whole crowd there was, Blue Jays fan. Is like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it, right? Yeah, it is a whole country. And when the team's good and relevant, I'm a baseball fan, obviously, but I want a good team. I'm not going to support anything, right? And it's pretty amazing to watch. It really is. And even my popularity up there, right? It's not like if the other 29 teams in the States, there's 29 other managers. Up there's only one, so they got no choice but to at least see me. They may not like me, but they know who I am. So that's a big part of that too.
You mentioned Josh Donaldson, and I'm curious what it was like to manage him. I barely covered him because he left right before I really got into the A's.
Okay.
I loved him as a teammate, as from what I observed, but I felt like he was always playing with a chip on his shoulder. What was it like to manage a guy like that?
Yeah, you know what? Josh and I got pretty tight, right? We still keep in touch. As a matter of fact, I talked to him the other day. When he was. He's down in AAA with the Brewers, know. He's a different cat. We had our battles, but there was also a lot in common. I think I understood him, and he understood me a little bit. And I gave him his freedom, but he's going to piss somebody off along the way. I even talked to Bob Melvin, about trading.
Yeah, I love
because Brett Laurie. Yeah, Brett Laurie was going out there. Brett was a handful too, right? And Billy Beane and I are all roommates. We both got drafted by the Mets in 1980 and lived together a couple of years. So I talked to Beaner, and of course Beaner was the guy that dealt him to us. So, but you know what? All I knew was this. He was a great baseball player, and that's the most important thing as far as we're trying to win. But you still got to be able to function within a system and with a team, and he was able to do that. He'd ruffle some feathers, but I've said this over and over and over. We had a talented team before he got there, but we brought him in and Russell Martin, those two, they brought some toughness to our team that we needed, and now you combine Josh and Bautista, two of the most disliked guys in the game, right? It helped us. It didn't hurt us, obviously because they're MVP type players, number one, but I think it gave us that edge that really helped us and what we needed.
Yeah, and I always think about, obviously, how the Coliseum is with all the left side of all the foul territory. I feel like nobody else could man that area. Obviously, with Chappie, and you obviously know who Chappie is, but if you can man the left side of the Coliseum and nothing gets by you, I feel like you have that dog in you. And I loved watching him on that left side. And I was a former third baseman myself, and I loved just watching what those two could do. You mentioned Bautista. He's very much a villain. This was a term he used. And I can't talk about Bautista unless we talk about that iconic bat flip, the 2015 ALDS. And you said on your or I think you were a guest on a podcast, but you said it might have been the best moment of your managerial career. But it couldn't have been anybody else to do that, because it was Bautista himself. So tell me about the moment and why it needed to be Bautista in that bat flip scenario.
Well, Jessica, you know what? He, we had a group of guys, you throw Encarnacion in there, even Josh, kind of late bloomers in their career, right? And so I think all of them had that edge, and all of them had that little chip on their shoulder because, Bautista was a journeyman been and never got an opportunity until he came to Toronto, and Cardassione, the same thing. And then Josh, he was a late bloomer. So they all play with that. They all play with that edge, right? But Bautista, Jose was the face of the franchise for a number of years. It led the league in home runs a couple of times on a team that did absolutely nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was basically his team. Even when Josh came over there, and some of the other guys, it was still Bautista's, team. And just the fact that he had been there so long, he had so much success at the team. It's all about the team winning. When he did that, Josh could have hit that home run. I don't think he would have had the same effect. Right. any of them, right? And because this was Jose's moment, right? That he's Mr. Blue Jay. He's never been to the postseason. The game on, the season's on the line, right? It's game 5. You got to win that one. And it was just, I don't know how to describe it other than it was just meant to be. It was supposed to be him because everything that led up to that, his reputation in the game. If he's outside of our team, he wasn't liked at all. He's probably the number one guy, number one villain. Josh might have been number 2, but Jose was number 1, right? And so it just and we were our team. Our team, we were known as whiners, complainers, because we'd whine about the strike zone, but our guys were usually right, But you know what? They'll get that reputation. So that's kind of, just kind of who we were, and he was kind of the leader of the pack. And been 23 years since they've been to the postseason, and now, okay, we get over that hump. And if we would have bowed out in that first round, because when Anthopoulos made all those deals to bring, to really set us on fire that year, if we'd have bowed out in that first round to the Rangers, it would have been wow. Probably all been forgotten, right? Yeah. But so it was magnitude of the situation, that inning, the way it started on a crazy throwback to the mound by Russell Martin, everything just built up to that point, and so yeah, obviously it's the greatest moment of my career. We finally won something. It was my first playoff experience as a manager. Yeah, pretty crazy.
And as a former catcher yourself, before this happened, are you pro or con bat flip?
Jessica, I'm an old fuddy-duddy a little bit, because that's kind of that's my age, right? That's the year I grew up in. I've never been a huge bat flip guy. I understand this was different, right? I mean, this was like a regular season game, and a guy, or you turn on the TV now, it's like, come on, we're out of control a little bit.
Early May or something like that. Yeah.
But there's I've always believed, not just in baseball and life and everything, there's kind of you got to earn your stripes and things, right? That's just kind of the way, and I think it works best when you do that. It doesn't mean you hold anybody down, these young kids. No, but you know what? Come on, and there's a good way to be a winner and a good way to be a loser. You don't show people up. You don't rub it in, anything like that. That was kind of ingrained in me and most people from a young age, right? And so, but this was different, right? This was 23 years of frustration built up into one swing of the bat, right? Mm-hmm. And the ironic thing about it, nobody celebrated home runs more than the Texas Rangers. That was kind of what was so funny about it, right? But so I didn't mind that moment. I actually didn't see him flip the bat. I'm tracking that ball out there. When he did flip it, I've seen it. I don't know how many times since, but yeah. So that didn't bother me. Probably I was on the good side of it. But even if say a guy for the Rangers had done that, understanding the moment in the playoff game, and it wouldn't have bothered me. Of course, then we had a big brawl with him at the next year. But like I said, they celebrated more than anybody. So it was kind of it wasn't kind of an odd moment, put it that way.
And you mentioned these brawls, and you had Justin Smoke on the show, and he said it like during the 15-16 era, there was a mentality where he believed everyone hated y'all. And he said, we just always felt like we were going to fight. So I feel like when I think about managers over the last 10 years, I don't think many managers, I don't want to say could have handled it, but I feel like you are the type of person, you had the mentality to kind of back them up without being too without being too rude about it, I don't know how else to explain it, but
Tell
me a little bit about that mentality, because I feel like that also added to why you guys were so successful.
Yeah, you know what, Jessica, we're a product of the way we grow up and in sports or whatever, however it worked out for you. But I always had great respect for the coaches I played for, the managers and all that. But I also understand, and I always knew the guys I liked the most were the guys that would also fight for me, And so the manager, if I expect a player to fight for me, I better fight for him, right? That's just kind of how the way it works, right? And we may not agree on everything. We may not always like each other, but the players are the show. These are the guys that the fans come to see. They don't come to see the manager, right? And I want them to give me everything that they got, so I better give them everything I got, right? So that's kind of how it all worked. But I also, these guys are at that age and they're high strung, racehorses, whatever you want to call them. And so, and they can get out of line every now and then, or they can lose their focus. My job is to keep them in line, however means necessary. And so, I had some conflicts with some guys, but there was nothing wrong with that. That's part of my job. Hey, I'm not. See, baseball, we're so crazy in the game now with analytics. Baseball is not X's and O's like football and some other sports. I don't care what you say, right?
Yeah.
Because the game will develop and lay out right there for you if you let it, right? So my job, or the manager's job, is keep these guys focused, keep them moving in the right direction, and getting the most out of them, right? The GM gives you your players. Your job is to get the most out of them. And so that was what I would do, but I would fight for them, but I expect them to fight back for me. And if we do something stupid on the field, it's too easy. And I think it happens a lot nowadays. People just turn their back, like they don't see it. And that gets you nowhere, right? Then the next thing you know, the manager's irrelevant and all that, So, and it worked with these guys, right? I'd give them the rope but hey, wait a minute. Come on, boys. We gotta, whether it's a team or the individual, let's go. We're losing our focus. We're concentrating on the wrong things here. Let's, that kind of thing. And with this group, it worked. But, I spent a couple months in 1986 with the 86 Mets that won the World Series. And you talk about a group of misfits, great players, but misfits. So I saw it firsthand, how Davey Johnson handled things. And so I knew what that was all about. Our team wasn't anything like that team. But you got to let these guys do their job. They all have different personalities. They come from different parts of the world, different economic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. So they're different. You can't expect the same thing out of every one of them. So let them be themselves. That's the beauty of baseball. But hey, this is we're here for this team to win, not for you to be the superstar that doesn't win anything, that kind of thing.
I will say, when be themselves is very important. I feel like Bob Melvin preached that. That's very a Clint Hurdle-esque type of mentality. I think it's beautiful. Before we get into the analytics discussion or lack thereof, there's a YouTube video dedicated to you, Gibby, 48 minutes long, just dedicated to your ejections. 48 minutes. And so I think you pretty much described it saying, yeah, I'm going to fight for my team just as much as they're going to fight for me. So I feel like the reason why you have a 48-minute long dedicated video is because of that. Like there's that fight in you.
Yeah. You know what, Jessica, that's, a manager's got an important job in baseball, but like I said, these guys got to go out there and perform, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you're calling plays every snap or something like that, right? But we get caught up in the emotion of it, right? And I can tell when an umpire's sticking it to one of my guys. I may do the same thing if I was that umpire, because I don't like what I'm hearing either, right?
Yeah.
But you know what? These are my guys, and you got to fight for them. And one thing people always ask me, did you do it to fire anybody else? I said, no, heck no, man. There's nothing phony about me, put it that way, because that doesn't work anyway. But so sometimes, hey, you know what? You need to stick up for you guys. And sometimes we were so bad, I got tired of watching it too. I'd just soon get thrown out so I can let somebody else run this team, because it ain't working what I'm doing, right? Yeah. And so yeah, I've seen some of that video, and probably would have been a few more, except they came up with replay. And,
the replay system would have lacked maybe like another 15 minutes to that video if it wasn't around.
Maybe, right.
So you mentioned the analytics, and I know you had Don Mattingly on your show, and he was talking about finding the balance between, you want to say the eye test or the feel for it, which is obviously very imperative. Talk about that, because of the fact that Don said like maybe there's more of a balance now, and of course he's with that organization. But what was your first exposure to analytics? And do you think that, or the hardcore analytics, batting average has always been around, but what was that exposure like? And do you think we're on our way to finding more of a balance as time goes on?
Yeah, I do think, and I'm happy for that. I think it's smart because it's still the game's still played by human beings, right? You know, when I went back to Toronto for my second time in 2013, Alex Anthopoulos was a GM. You know, I played my GM before that. My first go around was JP Ricciardi, another Oakland A there.
Mm-hmm.
But so analytics was coming on the scene. It was, you know, it was getting more and more during my second go around. And Alex believed in it. Alex Anthopoulos is a very smart guy, but he also understood the human side of it, right? And so when he left, and Shapiro came in, Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, they were much more heavy into it. It's kind of like, well, just like everybody else was, right?
Yeah.
But they let me do my own thing, which I appreciate. Okay. I think they would have, you know, hoped that I would have used it more. But there was only one way, you know, I knew how to do things. And ironically, we got to the playoffs again that year. So, I mean, so bottom line, I always had this question: if everybody's got the same numbers of analytics, or maybe some have bigger departments, I don't see how you can find any bigger secrets out there anymore. Is there anything unhidden that we don't know about in the game of baseball? So if that's the case, if everybody's got the same, how come every team's not 500, right? Everybody's got the same info. Well, you know why? I think because it for the way the game has been since inception was, if you got more talent and more of it, you're probably going to win, right? You know, because there's no secret. That's kind of, if you're going to, it doesn't work all the time now, but if you got more money to spend, you can probably get that better player. So otherwise, everybody be 500, I would assume, or closer to it. But you look at the same teams are good every year, and the same teams are bad every year. It seems like, right? So, okay. But anyway, you know, baseball has always been about numbers. You know, now we've gone to the extreme, obviously, and there's been a lot of good out of some of the new info that we get. But you can't lose sight of who's playing the game. You know, you know, it's an emotional game. Some guys like in any walk of life, you have good days, you have bad days, you're banged up, you're this or that. I guess the areas that I don't like as much is, you know, you'll on certain teams, the Blue Jays are one of them. Now, you go in there and there's the lineups, it could be the same guys in there, but the lineups, the orders change every day, right?
Yeah.
When you're good teams, and your teams, even though they're a good team, on your top teams, that lineup pretty much stays the same way, right? Almost every day, unless somebody's really struggling, they juggle it. But the reason I say that, because I wasn't a very good player, but I played a little bit. But talking to some of the great players that I've managed, it's just needs to be stability. You know, they don't even want to come to the ballpark every day and where am I playing? Where am I hitting in the order? And it may not seem like a lot to most people, and it probably shouldn't be, but there's something to that with these guys being, you know, just the constant, right? They get in these routines. They know, and okay, I'm the number 3 hitter on this team, right? Not 3 hitter one day and 6 hitter the next day. So that plays with their mind. People probably go, well, that's stupid. It shouldn't happen. Yeah, you're probably right, but it does. Okay. So automatically they fight you a little bit on that, or they think, and you know what happens when you do things like this? The players go, hey, you know, you're a puppet of the front office. And once that happens, forget it. You got no, because you know what? Because now they know they're controlling every move you make. So, you know, so then you lose some respect there, I think, right? Maybe not, but that's kind of my impression. That's the information I get from some of the players, right? And then also I look at, like, you know, what drives me nuts is I see the way pitching staffs are handled now, right? That, you know, the big thing is third time through the lineup. Yeah, that may be the case, and there's a lot of value in that. But what I don't understand, I see it happen all the time, is on any given night, right? That might be that pitcher's night, right? He could be a kid that just got brought up from AAA for one start. he might be on that night, right? Okay, if that's the case, let him go, right? Let him go. Let the game dictate. If you got a little lead, because guys do spectacular things on any given night in this business. Now he may pitch the next 5 more starts and never get anybody out, but this is his night, right? But I see guys, they'll yank guys third time through the lineup. It's like automatic, and the guy giving up 2 hits all night. It's like, really? And that, not just for that reason, I understand that to win, you have to have a good bullpen, right? And what happens if you don't let them go every now and then, if you don't push them, you kill your bullpen, right? And then you get to the end of the year, and if you're a playoff type team, these guys are out of gas. It's like the kid the other night for Seattle, right? Kirby, they leave him in the game, service left him in the game, and he coughs it up, and then he says, "I shouldn't have been in there." I said, "What?" I mean, come on! I don't think anybody's ever heard that. But meanwhile, I think their top 2 relievers have pitched 3 days in a row, so you can't pitch it. They need a break because your starters aren't going long enough. That's just kind of the way the game is. And then he comes out and hangs himself in the most selfish things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So I think somebody's suffering for it if you yank a pitcher earlier. I get it. That's the way the game needs to be. But Davey Johnson always. When I first got to the big leagues with the Mets in '84, he was the manager. And one thing I always learned, I was talking to him one day. He said early in the season, there could be either the starter or he could even have a reliever in the game. And if he gets into a jam, right, early in the season, he lets him try to work his way out of it. If he can prove to him that he can get out of jams, or he can prove to himself, he can prove to the team, or he can tell us no, he can't. And he says what that does for you, because you go to take them out right away all the time. They complain and they say, "Well, give me a chance." Okay, so now I give you a chance. If you prove that you can do it next time, you stay in there, get the job done, right? If you prove that you can't do it, you can't complain next time I take you out. It's kind of like that psychological thing, right? But if you never give these guys a chance to prove that they can do things, you'll never know.
And they have to fail too. They have to fail to learn. I know that sounds silly, but I hear that all the time. Like, how are you ever going to learn if you're not dealing with those situations? Yeah.
Well, it's saying that though, the numbers say, these guys after pitching a number of innings and a number of years, they get that third time through. This is what happens. And if things spike up pretty quick, okay, you got to be conscious of that. And that may be the time to take them out. But on this particular night, this guy may have his no-hitter going, right? So get out of the way, man. Just get it. I think sometimes when we hurt ourselves as managers, we get in the way of things sometimes, right? We get too smart. We want to sometimes, man, and I found this out with some of the good teams I had. Get the heck out of the way, man. Let the boys do their thing. And then you're going to be better off,
One of my favorite jokes, and I'll ask you that too, is I'm old enough to remember when a pitcher went 9 innings. Like, I remember those days. When did you notice that there was a little bit more, I don't want to say, definitely respect. I actually talked to Lance Lynn about this recently. And he said, back when I started, if you were a bullpen guy, if you were a reliever, you're pretty much saying my career's over. But now a bullpen guy they're getting paid well. The monetary value's there for the contracts. But also they're putting respect on. You have guys like Josh Hader and Cy Young talks. Like that wasn't heard of. When did you notice the transition where starting pitchers, they're important, of course, but maybe they're going only 5 or 6 innings?
Yeah, God, that's a good question. All I know is this: if you're going to be any good, you better have a good bullpen, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't care what era you're in, because your starters, they may go deep in the game, but you got to have somebody to close it out, right? But yeah, the whole thinking now has changed in maybe mid 2000s, maybe, I guess, especially when Tampa started using the opener, right? Yeah. When they first year they started doing that. I mean, and it made some sense, but it was like, really, this is Major League Baseball. Is a game? I mean, is there that a shortage of talent out there? We can't even get, starters are meaningless now. Of course, then they take away the wins and losses, and I understand a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff goes into whether the guy wins or loses, right? Whatever happens later in the game. But I will guarantee you this, and any manager you talk to will tell you this, coach, hopefully front office. You know what? There's certain guys that are out there. They'll find a way to win, they'll find a way to lose. And they may not get the decision, but when in crunch time, it could be in the middle of the game, when a lot of times guys are yanked out, certain guys, they figure out a way to stay out on top, or they hold the lead for you, right? So you can turn it over some. Certain guys find a way to cough it up, and that's so that may be wins and losses, maybe not a fair way to judge things, but what I'm talking about, there's a mentality of certain guys in that belief in themselves, and some guys want to be in there, some guys want out, and I don't know, and wins and losses do matter, because usually the guys that are getting all the wins, they stay in the games a long time too, right?
Yeah.
You don't need 4 or 5 guys to. That's what I think drives everybody crazy. It's like, where you end up killing your bullpens is if the guys just go 5, you got to cover 4 innings. Very few guys throw more than 1 inning anyway, so you're using at least 4 more guys, and and that happens almost every day of a. Maybe they ought to increase the roster size a couple more, put a few extra guys in the bullpen. I don't know.
Well, and you have a long man one day. He may not be a long man the next week. He can only go 1 inning too. So you don't have a designated guy who's going to give you multiple innings, which is always interesting. And we have a guy, Austin Pruitt. We love to say, have glove will travel. He's been an opener. Yeah. He's been a starter. He's been a long man. He's been a closer. The guy can do it. I think he could probably play in the infield if we needed. And it's just kind of interesting to see how I feel like there's obviously a skill to that too. You hope and pray that these things kind of stack up against one another. And the opener is kind of interesting to me. I always kind of hated it at the beginning, but unless it works out in our favor, then I'm like, that wasn't that bad.
The game's changed so much in the bullpens, but you go back, one of the greatest Oakland A's of all time, Raleigh Fingers. One of I was watching, it wasn't too long ago, one of the old, I think they were playing the Mets in the World Series, whatever year that was, 72 maybe. Anyway, I think Kenny Holtzman might have started the game, and they brought Fingers in, their closer, Hall of Fame closer. And I think in the 4th inning or something, he finished the game off, And nowadays, it's don't you dare ask a closer to go more than 1 inning, for crying out loud. And here's one of the all-time greats. So the game has changed, and a lot of it's for the better. There's no doubt about it. But there's still some basics and still some things that, or maybe I'm just old-fashioned. We get a little older. Sometimes we're stubborn, and we can't always see the bright side of things.
No, that's okay. I feel like that's imperative to the game. You can't lose sight of what it was, and that's what makes it so pure.
Right.
But before I let you go, this is more like a thank you. I'm really enjoying your show, but we talked about it earlier, just your ability, and you said you're kind of introduced to a different version of José Bautista yourself. And I knew him as, the bat flip guy and the guy who follows everybody and their mom on Twitter. But it was also kind of one of those scenarios where you had the ability to show the world who Bautista was. And I think that that's really cool that you're able to do that just as his former manager, but also just a human being. And you said you're so yourself, that's the side of Jose I didn't even know existed.
Yeah. When he's an active player, right? He's all about, he's going to make the most out of his career. I tell everybody this all the time, and I've had some really good players, some of the best motivated guys you'll ever want to meet. Jose was number 1 on my list for the guy that showed up ready to play every day. Mm-hmm. Because number 1, he was going to get the most out of his career. He had the chip on his shoulder. He was a journeyman early on. He was considered a utility guy. And when he came to Toronto, things all came together for him, right? But so he did have that chip, and he was going to maximize whatever time he had left. He was going to get the most out of it. Plus, he had a great understanding that people came to watch him play, right? People paid to watch him. So he's going to be in there every day. So he was always ready to play. You couldn't get him out of the lineup. Nowadays, guys skip games, and maybe there's some value to some of that, but he was going to play, and then he produced, right? He butted heads. He got your team into some hot water, but by God, he produced. But when he's an active player, he's a very intense guy. He's a very emotional guy. So I don't remember seeing him too often relaxing, or seeing him away from the park. All I ever saw him was at the ballpark, right? And then he's got a beautiful family. He's four daughters. And so when he came on the show, is at the man. Boy, he softened up, for crying out loud. It was so cool to see. And then I got to go when they put his name on the Wall of Excellence up there in Toronto. It was on full display. He was emotional. I go, man,
who's this guy?
He was a jerk half the time. No, man, I love the guy. No, I don't mean that, but he's a special guy, with a special family, and he's earned everything he's gotten. But there's a soft side underneath all that toughness that people are finally seeing, I think, or at least people on the baseball side of it that didn't know him. Family, friends, all that, they know all that.
Yeah. No, it was really cool. And it was like, I had to kind of do a double take. I'm like, is he still talking to Jose? Like, who is this guy? But I think that's what really, that was awesome. But yeah, thank you for your time. And thanks for all the A's references. You really know your demographic over here. I appreciate that.
Oh yeah. I go way back with some of those A's. Yeah. Oh yeah. And
everybody's a former A. I love to say that everybody is a former A in some capacity. So I told you guys you would love that conversation. I don't lie to you, at least to your face. That was former Blue Jays manager John Gibbons. One thing that he's good at is doing nothing. I can relate to that. So good to hear from him. He's also the author of Gibby, Tales of a Baseball Lifer. Josh Donaldson did write the foreword of that book, so it's going to be good. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode. I absolutely loved it. Once again, thanks to Philip for putting up with me and all my nonsense. Be sure you are listening to this podcast and following it, liking, subscribing to Short and to the Point. Everything on Awful Announcing and the Comebacks website. Check all of that out. We'll see you next time.
Want even more short and to the point? Follow Jessica at Kleinschmidt JD and head over to thecomeback.com and awfulannouncing.com.